Welcome back everyone, it's me Matt. First of all, let's kick this video off with announcing that I am terrified of Russian artillery systems, particularly the one we are talking about today. And as you can see in some of this footage we're looking at here, the Russian arsenal for rocket artillery is vast. And not just rocket artillery, conventional artillery. And this one particularly that we're talking about today terrifies me, the BM-30 Smersh. Now, as you can see in this footage, there's a whole host of rocket MLRS being deployed, but the Smersh is one that I truly am quite terrified of, because it could be a weapon system engaging me, if it ever came to it, in combat, and there are lots of different platforms producing a massive amount of weight of fire for the Russian armed forces, and multiple countries around the world that use these systems. But this particular one really terrifies me to the fact of the amount of firepower that can be placed in the range of these rockets, and how many of them there are in terms of volume of fire. Look at the size of these rocket pods. They are absolutely massive, and the various weapon systems that can be put inside of the warhead, whether it be cluster munitions, conventional munitions, guided munitions, there's a lot of flexibility and customization in this platform, and so many people have asked me, Matt, please make a video on this system, and I decided eventually to get round to it. But I have to admit, this thing is terrifying to me as a field artillery gunner, because it's likely something that would be engaging my artillery position or fire position with my field guns if it ever came down to it. Which, of course, as you know on my channel, I try to stay neutral, but there's the facts of the matter is this thing would probably be something that would take me out in the artillery realm. But before we get into the video, let me know what your favorite rocket artillery is. There are so many platforms out there. I know a massive amount of you love the HIMARS system, of course the M270 MLRS from the United States. But this thing I have to respect. I have to look into this platform because I don't know much about it myself until doing research. And just the number of pods that exist in the Russian arsenal for this particular system is vast. There's close to 850 of these platforms available for the Russian armed forces. That is a huge amount of artillery, considering the other MLRS systems that Russia has in its arsenal. This is the biggest one. It is an absolute behemoth, and let's get into the details of this machine so that we can kind of understand a little bit more how it operates. So, like most Russian equipment today, or Soviet equipment of today that has kind of turned into Russian equipment, the BM-30 Smersh was born out of the Cold War arms race in the late 1970s and 1980s. The Soviet Union needed a long-range, high-power artillery system to counter NATO's growing capabilities in precision-guided munitions and mobile warfare, particularly the M270. Existing 120mm and 220mm rocket launchers like the BM-21 Grad and BM-27 Uragan lacked the range and destructive capability to neutralize heavily fortified targets. Thus, Splav State Research and Production Enterprise developed the BM-30 Smerch, meaning tornado in Russian. Officially entering service in 1989, this system was designed to destroy enemy troops, command posts, armored convoys, but particularly artillery batteries over vast distances. This is literally an artillery killer. It's a prime target on the battlefield. Artillery is such a valuable target, and the range and firepower in these systems could take out entire grid squares where artillery regiments or batteries could be held in place, and that is a big winner for artillery engagements across any battlefield, and as we're seeing like today, Ukraine. Unlike traditional tube artillery or field guns, the Smersh relies on a barrage of unguided rockets, saturating the area with overwhelming levels of firepower. Its development also coincided with improvements in Soviet rocket propulsion technology, allowing for longer ranges and greater accuracy. Each 300mm rocket was designed to travel up to 90 kilometers and later upgraded to 120 kilometers, making it one of the longest range rocket artillery systems of its time. Even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia continued its production and export, solidifying the Smerch's place in modern military arsenals around the world. So now I've covered its origins, let's break down the technical aspects of this vehicle. What makes it so devastating? Well, first, it's mounted on the MAZ 543M 8x8 wheeled chassis, allowing for a very good mobility across the nastiest terrain. It is an absolute monster, and the vehicle needs to be a monster because each launcher carries 12 300mm rocket tubes capable of firing a full salvo in just 38 seconds. The system's high explosive warheads create a deadly impact radius, effectively neutralizing both soft and hardened targets, but raw firepower isn't the only thing that makes it so dangerous. Its onboard fire control system allows it to adjust targeting very quickly, particularly in its modern configuration, making it a formidable artillery asset in both offensive and defensive operations. With a range of up to 120 kilometers, it significantly outranges traditional tube artillery, making counter-battery artillery fire very difficult for the enemy. Additionally, some newer versions of the Smersh are equipped with GPS-guided munitions now, increasing their accuracy beyond traditional unguided rockets. In the past, as I mentioned, it was saturation fire. Just fire as much unguided heavy artillery as you can in rocket tubes, and hopefully they'll get their heads down or not come back up for more. But now, the BM-30 Smersh is actually looking at guided systems using GPS, just like the Excalibur round for a traditional munition, and of course the M270's rockets that are now very, very good at locking onto targets from long distances. The BM-30 Smersh is not a one-size-fits-all weapon though. It's designed to fire a variety of warheads tailored to different combat scenarios. May I just add that this sneaky little tactic in this footage right now is fantastic, where they just look as if it's a logging truck, but it's actually a gigantic 300mm rocket pod. I thought that was kind of sneaky, but kind of interesting. Its standard high explosive fragmentation rockets are designed to cause very large levels of destruction. Within 200 meters, anything in that area is going to have a really bad day. Oh, and that's 200 meters per rocket, not 200 meters for the entire salvo, which means that you can basically cover up to roughly a grid square if you wanted to launch these rockets in certain configurations, particularly as a battery. They are grid square killers. We've talked very many times about the M270 and other American systems being grid square killers, but from 90 kilometers away in a standard configuration and 120 kilometers away in the upgraded configuration, there's a lot to fear from the range and the ability of these munitions. Another incredible feature for this system is actually the ability to take out tanks. Yes, it can fire self-guided anti-tank sub-munitions, which use infrared sensors to home in on the enemy armor, effectively acting as a long-range tank killer. Now, this isn't really new or sophisticated in today's standards. We know that the Western counterparts have rounds like the bonus round, but the mere fact that this is a 300mm projectile means that that rocket can carry more of those submunitions, therefore being able to make a better chance and probability of knocking out armor when it comes to engaging and finding the tanks on the ground. The more and the bigger that these things are, the more technology you can cram in there, the better accuracy they have, and just the more spread of which you're trying to engage the tanks can be, which is kind of terrifying because it's basically a top-down attack drone but in artillery form. But the most feared and deadly particular projectile and munition for this is the cluster munitions, dispersing multiple submunitions over a wide area, making it deadly against troops, vehicles and runways, but particularly artillery batteries. Yes, these are going to cause absolute devastation to the logistics, the guns themselves, the optics. There's so much that can go wrong with submunitions as well, which kind of terrify the troops in saying, well, a lot of them didn't go off, they're buried in the soil. You now have somewhat of a minefield. That's why cluster munitions are most feared, is because not many of them actually go off. They are a very complicated system to use, and when they fail, you've basically turned the entire area into somewhere you can't go. It's area denial. And finally, the other feared warhead is the Thermobaric warhead, which creates a high-temperature blast capable of incinerating enemies inside fortifications, caves, buildings, bunkers, trenches, you name it. Some upgraded versions even have GLONASS GPS guidance, significantly increasing the system's accuracy and effectiveness in urban and precision strike operations. Being that the vehicle is highly mobile and a rapid strike weapon system, once a target is identified, the launcher can move into position, fire its salvo, and relocate within about 5 minutes to avoid counter-fire. This shoot and scoot tactic is critical for survival against enemy counter-battery radars, airstrikes, and its own rocket artillery. Each battery normally consists of 7 multiple launch vehicles, along with a command and control unit and reload vehicles. Now, the rockets can actually be pre-programmed with different trajectories, allowing operators to not only target a single position, but multiple enemy positions in one single strike. Many countries, including Russia, India, Belarus, and Algeria, integrate BM-30 into their combined arms warfare strategies, using it to soften enemy defenses before launching ground assaults or using shorter-range rocket artillery. It's safe to say that the BM-30 has solidified itself in combat capabilities and battle real-world combat. It was first deployed by Russia in Chechnya in the early 2000s, where it was used to destroy enemy targets and positions in mountainous terrain. In 2014, in the war in Donbass, both Ukrainian and Russian-backed forces used the Smerch launchers to conduct long-range artillery strikes. In 2020, Armenia and Azerbaijan employed BM-30 launchers for deep strikes against enemy infrastructure, and of course more recently the ongoing conflict in Ukraine has seen heavy use of rocket artillery, including the BM-30, with devastating results from both sides. Now, the vehicle remains the most powerful, influential multiple-launch rocket system for the Russian armed forces today. However, being that it's 3 decades old, its sheer destructive capability, range and versatility have ensured that it's going to be modernized. As you can see, this platform isn't going anywhere. It's been here for a while and it's here to stay. And the mere fact that they're able to change the projectile but keep the same tube and carrier means that it's an old bit of kit, but why change something if it ain't broke? You know, that platform and that vehicle that's driving around is very, very good. You know, Russian equipment has always been renowned for being very robust. It's not the most high quality, it's not the most rigid in terms of technology that they have inside of there, but if you want to drive it across terrain and get it where it needs to go, or repair it or fix it, you're going to be able to do that pretty quickly, and the BM-30 is no different to that. The main components of a Smerch battery are the following. The rocket pods in containers are carried in 9M55 or 9M528 configurations. There is the BM-9A52-2 launch vehicle, the TZM-9T234-2 transloader with an 850kg crane and 12 spare rockets. These follow the vehicles behind in their own logistical configuration for rear echelon support. Automated fire control equipment is in the command post known as the 1K123 Viveri. A maintenance vehicle PM-270 MTOV also follows along with arsenal equipment of the 9F819, and training facilities are also available in batteries that are training back home as the 9F827 and 9F840. This vehicle is not light. It weighs 43.7 tons fully loaded and has a crew of 3. It is powered by a V12 diesel D12 Alpha 525 Alpha 525 horsepower engine with 8x8 wheeled configuration, giving it a lot of good ground capability when it's going across nasty terrain. Its operational range is 850 kilometers with a speed of 60 km an hour off-road and a roughly 80 kilometers an hour on-road. Of course, though, when you're driving these things off nasty terrain, you don't want to be bouncing them around too much. Rockets are calibrated pieces of equipment. There are also a lot of explosives in the back of there, and I wouldn't want to be bouncing a long tube on the back of there too much. So if you're driving at 60 km an hour as a crew with your rocket pods like that, you're asking for trouble. When setting up the platform, it does have stabilizer legs and is operated by almost kind of a rotational automatic cradle, which allows the gunners to rotate the pods into where they need to go. And it's traditional artillery. There's nothing really fancy about this system. You're basically looking through optics like you would on a field gun, lining it up with a collimator or some other kind of reference point, and coordinates are then given to you either in bearings or angles from the gun position or your command post to allow the rockets to be fired in the correct direction. Of course, now though, we are looking at GPS systems, so there may not be as much need for you to accurately rotate the cradle of the rocket pods to fire accurately, because the GPS will take over in the rocket once it leaves the tube. However, the majority of firing of this, is what I've noticed in my research, is done away from the vehicle. The crew do not stay inside of the compartment of the vehicle. They tend to dig trenches nearby and then create a lanyard that is linked to an electronic firing device, and they fire from a distance. This is probably why, because there has been some notable situations where rockets pre-detonate or do not leave the tube, and there's nothing worse than being nearby a 12 rocket tube system of 300mm configuration and it pre-detonate with you in the back of the cab. It's just not going to go well. So a majority of the crews actually remote fire from distance, and I think that's a smarter configuration than staying in the cab. There's no requirement to, but the cab does give a nice crew confinement area for them to kind of chill out, get some heat, and keep warm when they're not firing. As you can see by the sighting system here, though, it is basically a simple panoramic sight that I actually similarly use for my field gun. So if you're not using GPS systems, it is traditional artillery. You're just using a different projectile, and the weapon of the artillery is the projectile, in this case a gigantic 300mm rocket. So it's primitive, but it works. And those rocket pods are quite quick to reload. It takes approximately 10 to 15 minutes to relocate all 12 rockets back into those tubes, and considering they are 9 meters long, that's pretty impressive. And that's something you really need to take into consideration when you're using heavy artillery. If it takes a very long time for you to reload those pods, they're not actually as useful as you think they are. Logistics is something that isn't as sexy as the actual warheads or the vehicle itself, but it's really important in the artillery world. If you cannot replenish systems like this, they're kind of useless and you're wasting a lot of time, particularly when you're wanting to engage mass amounts of targets. And that's the purpose of heavy artillery. Get as long range firepower as you can get downrange, and as much of it with the biggest warhead, and then get back into the fight and do it again and again and again, pounding targets. And the Smersh does that. It really does. I mean, 10 to 15 minutes to reload this thing is very impressive considering the size of the rockets. But even if you're not using traditional fire control systems, the advanced fire control system is known as the Vivari FCS, which can function automatically or under manual control, meaning that you don't need to do that traditional movement as you would on the kind of platform and the cradle there. The controls can be done within inside of the vehicle, and the Vivari system controls the 6 Smerch launchers in a unit and is housed in a separate command vehicle, and it either has 1 or 2 E175 computers to calculate ballistic and targeting data for each launcher. The command vehicle has both satellite and radio communications to link both subordinate units and headquarters. There is also a miniature aerial vehicle, or an R-90, containing a stabilized camera that was developed for launch from the Smerch launcher, enabling real-time battle surveillance data to be relayed to the commander. The aerial vehicle, which uses GPS, has the same range as the rocket itself, 70 kilometers, and can transmit data for up to 30 minutes. So for all those drone fanboys out there, because I know there's so many of you in my comments lately talking about how drones are winning the war, artillery and drones work coincidentally very well together, and this system actually has its own dedicated drone, which I thought was kind of cool. Now, the original Smersh is known as the BM-30 Smersh, but the MLRS can also be called the BM-30 9A52-4 Tornado, which is a modernized version with a lightweight launch vehicle that can carry 6 launch tubes when compared to the traditional capacity of 12. It features either the 9YA295 type modular container or the MZ196 type reloadable container. The new weapon system can accommodate only a crew of 2 and fire the same 300mm rockets, but can engage targets further in the 120km range. Approved for exports in August 2019, the Tornado S MLRS provides increased range and firing accuracy when compared to the Smersh. It's equipped with the new 300mm guided missiles, with a provision for inputting individual flight mission data for each projectile using a control unit for different flight ranges and trajectories. The accuracy of the Tornado S shells is 15 to 20 times higher than that of the Smersh shells, and each shell can break up armor into 140 inches. A satellite navigation system guides the shells to the target with extremely good accuracy, and it's been well known that the modernized rockets for these platforms are doing extremely well, particularly right now in Ukraine. So folks, what do you think of this platform? I have to admit and reinforce that I am terrified of this system. I really hope I never have to face it, because the ranges it can fire and the different projectiles it can put into place, and the number of them that exist on the battlefield. I mean, even if you took 2 of these batteries out, you've still got, 100 more behind it ready to go. There's just so much weight of fire that can be put onto the battlefield, and I'm not sure how many of those 850 have been destroyed in the Ukrainian war right now. Kind of interesting to see what the numbers would be today, but there's still a whole lot of them out there, and that is quite scary for those who are on the battlefield fighting against counter-battery artillery fire for this particular system. Let me know, folks, in the comments section below what you think of this platform. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. Of course, if you did, please leave me a like. It really helps me on the algorithm front. Algorithm hasn't been very nice to me lately with YouTube. Lots of reasons why, don't need to get into it. If you want to support my channel, of course, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe and click the little bell button. And check out my description box below for any content that you want to see in terms of social media, and also any financial support that you wish to give me, which a lot of you have been doing with Patreon and PayPal, so thank you so much for that. And I hope to see you on the next video, folks. Have a wonderful day. All the best. Bye-bye.